Our today's topic is making of the Constitution of India. Now, we are proud of being part of an independent nation. But things were not so easy. We had to go a long way before we had a constitution of ourselves. Now, we'll divide our topic in three parts. First, I'll be dealing with historical context for the formation of a Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly, which actually framed the Constitution for the sovereign, independent Indian people. And then, in the second episode, we'll be dealing with composition and functions of the Constituent Assembly, how they dealt with while framing the Constitution. And in the third lecture, we'll go for a critical evaluation of their role. So far as the first topic is concerned, we know that a major part of Indian subcontinent was under British rule since 1857. Actually, this sort of process of this sort of dependence started right from 1757 from the Battle of Plassey, when Lord Clive, by hook and crook, he entered into Indian political scenario, and somehow British rulers entered into the Indian political system, and India became a colony of the British rule. But since 1857, British rule was very stringent, and as we know, that Sepoy Mutiny was perhaps the first rebellion of the indigenous Indian people against the oppression made by the British rulers. From then on, exploitation by the British rulers, both in the social, economic, and political context, actually helped the gradual rise of Indian independence movement, nationalist upsurgence. Indian National Congress played its primary role in leading the Indian nationalist movement. There is no doubt about it that there was only Indian National Congress, and after following that, it was Muslim League who definitely played a very important role in making India an independent nation. In 1934, actually, Indian leaders, they demanded for a constitution of India prepared by the Indians themselves. That is, to be prepared by a constituent assembly made by the Indian people. That was denied by the British rulers. In 1933, with keeping in mind, Indian leaders rejected the White Paper of 1933, which consisted of the proposals for Indian constitutional reforms. This demand was again resisted by the British ruler due to outbreak of World War II. After World War II, external circumstances compelled the British rulers. External circumstances mean the circumstances the British had to face not only within India, but not only in other colonies they made, but also in the world political system. These external circumstances made the British realize that they must leave these colonies, because it was not possible for the British rulers to handle British nation as well as their colonies they used to rule so far. So, in 1940, the coalition government of Britain, they agreed that India must have a constitution framed by the Indians themselves. Following World War II, therefore, the British rulers announced their Indian policy and decided to convene a constitution drafting body. Again, made by the Indians themselves. 3 British cabinet ministers were thus sent. 1. Lord Patrick Lawrence. 2. Sir Stafford Cripps. And 3. A.V. Alexander. They were all cabinet ministers sent to India to take the initiative for the formation of the Constituent Assembly as well as to put the guideline for framing of the Constitution of India. So British rulers were not ready to leave India in their own position. They still tried to have some sort of control over independent India through making of this constitution. This mission was called Cabinet Mission, which was sent to India at the initiative of the then British Prime Minister Clement Attlee. This cabinet mission remained in India from March 1946 to May 1946. What was their objective? British cabinet mission aimed to discuss and plan for transfer of power from the British rulers to the Indian leaders. That was the beginning for the step towards independence of India. Their proposals came as recommendations and were subject to approval of 2 major parties. I have already told that 2 major parties were, one, the Congress, Indian National Congress, and the second was the Muslim League. The Viceroy began to organize this process of transfer of power from British rulers to India. On 24th August 1946, formation of an interim government was announced. Members of the interim government were actually the members of Viceroy's Council. Who was this Viceroy? This Viceroy actually was a part or deputy or representative of the British government. So this interim government was formed under the auspices of the British rulers. Again, a colonial legacy was left. The Viceroy continued to be the head of this council, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was designated as the Vice President of the council, or better to say, the de facto Prime Minister of India. Meanwhile, the Constituent Assembly, from which interim government was drawn, had to struggle a lot to draft a constitution for independent India. What was that struggle? Actually, the struggle was regarding the distribution or balancing of power between Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. The Muslim League, and especially its leader Muhammad Ali Jinnah, condemned this interim government. Why he condemned? He condemned because he wanted to have a separate Constituent Assembly for absolutely a separate state, that is Pakistan. Lord Wavell, the then Viceroy, failed to reconcile the points of dispute between the Congress leaders and the League leaders and could not convene any meeting till 9th of December 1946. In the meantime, there was outbreak of communal riots, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah announced for Direct Action Day. Direct Action Day led to communal disturbances all along the Bengal and other Muslim-dominated part of undivided India. Jawaharlal Nehru tried his best to console and waited for Jinnah to take a revised decision. Though Jawaharlal Nehru was not supported by Patel and other leaders in this issue, still he attempted to pacify Jinnah's claim. After his failure, when Lord Mountbatten replaced Lord Wavell, Indian Congress leaders, they communicated entire thing to Lord Mountbatten. And Lord Mountbatten tried to expedite the process. He upheld the purpose of the cabinet mission. In nutshell, the chief proposals of the cabinet mission were there should be Union of India embracing British India and the states. The Union should have an executive and legislature of representatives chosen from the British India and the states. All subjects other than the Union subjects would be vested in the states. So far as this third point is concerned, it was Jinnah's initiative so that the states be given more powers. Otherwise, Congress always demanded a centralized government so as to coordinate things between the states and the center, or to hold, rather to say, to hold a very strong control over the peripheries of India. So, it was Jinnah who demanded for more state power, though he didn't agree to these cabinet mission proposals later on, and ultimately wanted a separate Constituent Assembly. These proposals were not carried forward because of the disagreement between Congress and Muslim League. And first interim government, which was announced on 24th August 1946, which was actually Viceroy's Executive Council, also failed to function properly. However, first interim government was actually the reflection of the future state of governance in independent India. Who were the members? The members were, apart from Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, there were other members. Sikh leader Baldev Singh, he dealt with Department of Defense. Chakraborty Raja Gopalachari, Department of Education and Arts. Asaf Ali, a Muslim Congress leader, Department of Railways and Transport. Scheduled caste leader Jagjivan Ram, Department of Labour. Rajendra Prasad, Department of Food and Agriculture. John Mathai, Department of Industries and Supply. And as the Muslim League ultimately joined the interim government on 13th of October, they added Abdur Rab Nistar, Department of Post and Air, and Ibrahim Ismail Chandrigar, Department of Commerce. Muslim League representation in the interim government headed Liaquat Ali Khan, who used to deal with Department of Finance. Thus, the interim government was again reconstituted on 26th of October 1946. So, once it was formed in the month of August, then Muslim League denied to join it, and again when Muslim League agreed to join, then it was reconstituted on 26th October 1946. Muslim League also nominated a scheduled caste Hindu politician Jogendranath Mondal to lead the Department of Law. But this coalition didn't last long. Ultimately, this didn't serve the interest of either the Muslim League or the Congress. So, Jinnah and the League, they didn't want to go for this coalition, and the process of interim government failed to serve its purpose. Muslim League urged for the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly on the ground that it failed to represent all sections of people of India. Actually, if we look at the composition of the Constituent Assembly, it was 82% Congress leaders, better to say either elected by the Congress or nominated by the Congress, who joined Constituent Assembly. So, naturally, Muslim League was scared as to their security as regards the distribution of power in the center and in the periphery. So, Muslim League urged for the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly, and by the second session of the Assembly held in late January 1947, it became clear that League would quit the Assembly. On 20th February 1947, government in Britain gave a very clear statement. I will read out that statement. It was a very strategic statement. It would transfer authority by June 1948. But if by that time a fully representative Constituent Assembly could not be formed, then British government will have to consider to whom the powers of the central government in British India should be handed over on the due date. To whom powers of the central government in British India should be handed over. That is, if there is none who'd accept the charge, then British will stay. That was their vision. But Muslim League didn't consider it enough to join the assembly and continued pressing for a separate Constituent Assembly for Pakistan. So partition was in the air by April, and assembly was restricted to draft a constitution. What it could do, it only could declare an objective resolution of the Constituent Assembly. And Lord Mountbatten, when he came to India and replaced Lord Wavell, he made avenues to expedite the process of this transfer of power. By this time, as I have already said, that coalition was unworkable, would inevitably break down. India witnessed bloodshed, violence and mass killings. This led to the eventual proposal and acceptance of partition of India. So, India was partitioned. Two new nations came into being, one India and the other Pakistan, with their own sets of Constituent Assembly. The movement not only culminated in the formation of a Dominion of India on 15th of August 1947, but also compelled the Governor General to announce on 26 July 1947 that a separate Constituent Assembly would be formed for Pakistan as well as for India. Now, as soon as Muslim League, they left the assembly, the indigenous assembly, and started for formation of a new Constituent Assembly, the process was stalled and framing of the constitution suffered a jolt, because Constituent Assembly for India again was to be reconstructed. And as I have already mentioned, that there was paucity of time as well as of money. India was in hurry because to get rid of British colonial oppression and British colonial domination, India needed a constitution. But this factor, that is cleavage or confrontation between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, perhaps made British or allowed British to stay longer in India, and they actually perhaps laughed at our drawback that we, the Indians, could not get united as regards this vital question of getting independence. Thus, two separate independent dominions were set up with their own set of Constituent Assembly. This Constituent Assembly, after their reconstitution, reassembled on 14th day of August 1947 to finalize a constitution for sovereign India. The Constituent Assembly of India, of course, worked hard to design a constitution for India, and the Indian Constitution was finally adopted on 26th day of November 1949. In this long journey, of course, hurdles were there, but at least India won freedom at midnight of August 1947, following which we got our constitution. In this constitution, also a question we can ask, to what extent it is a sovereign entity? Because the provisions of Government of India 1935, though never implemented fully, but had a very deep impact on the Constitution of India. Many key features of the Constitution were directly taken from this Act. The federal structure of government, provincial autonomy, a bicameral legislature consisting of a federal assembly and a council of states, separation of legislative power or distribution of power between the center and the states, and so many such other provisions were directly taken from this 1935 Act, Government of India Act, which was actually the creation of the British government. Now, after several amendments, we are having our own constitution with our own values, own set of necessities. And let's see, so far as we, the Indian citizens, are concerned, can make it absolutely an indigenous one. So far we have discussed, therefore, that India won freedom, and in the process of winning this freedom, there were lots of hurdles. After lots of challenges, after lots of confrontations, a separate Constituent Assembly for India was framed with its own indigenous problems, with its several limitations. Still, they worked hard, and ultimately, we got our constitution.